Welcome everyone to community chat for August 26th. A couple updates and a preview of a NativeScript 7 project to set some expectations for the 7 release that is going to happen Monday at the end of the day. So we are going to bump out the 7.0 release at the end of the day, Monday. And we're going to take a look at just an actual NativeScript 7 project and just look at the main key differences, which we've touched on in past calls before, but largely there's no embedded package JSON anymore. So for most out there, you may be used to seeing an embedded package JSON that included runtime flags and some other properties that were picked up from the runtime and build configuration. That's all been consolidated now into a singular NativeScript config. This config file is strongly typed, so it will allow you to see all of the actual properties that the runtime can pick up. For a lot of people, they're going to see flags here they never even knew existed, and that's because some of them were undocumented. We are working on adding proper descriptions to these, some of which we've already added. You can see for iOS, it actually does explain what the discard uncaught JS exceptions is actually for and what it's used for. We're going to do this for really all the flags that you can use in the configuration. So all of these properties that affect the Android runtime, we'll have descriptions on them. It'll describe what they do. So hopefully this will teach some others as to what other things you can do and configure for the runtimes, as well as provide a place that we can introduce new properties and new functionality to the CLI and the build process that had not been possible before, as well as provide clear descriptions for it to be a bit self-documenting. So if we introduce new config properties, we can write a post about it, and when you update to any patch version, because it's strongly typed, you would actually get those new properties with descriptions all right in front of you here. The other change in NativeScript 7 that we have touched on before and seeing it in practice here in a real project is the actual package now is much simpler. It's much more like a standard JavaScript project. There's no custom foreign NativeScript key anymore. The runtimes are managed inside of here, which you can actually highlight and get latest version info just naturally through your IDE for most IDEs. And these RCs are what's going to be published here on Monday at the end of the day. So NativeScript core is going to be 7.0. Types will be 7.0. Webpack is going to be 3.0. It's currently on a 2.1 series, and there's kind of some talk as to whether we keep that aligned with core, but there's no real reason to do so, although we're still kind of debating. It's possible we could do a big jump to 7.0 and make it consistent with everything there. But this is either going to be 3.0 for the final or 7.0. Let's see, those are actually the only 2 changes. The new final release will have a major bump on Webpack that includes a subtle modification in the Webpack configs that allows the NativeScript config to actually write its properties for the runtime. So other than that, the configs are the same as they were for the 2.1 series if you've been using those in any projects currently. And outside of that, as far as from project structure, that's all that is new in 7.0. Just a consolidation of configuration, strongly typing the config to be a bit self-documenting, as well as allow us to introduce new things in this config that you can do over time in a much easier fashion, and the consolidation of the package, simplification, and managing the runtimes here. The other big thing with 7.0 is actually NativeScript iOS 7.0, which is published right now, is V8. So this is the new V8 iOS runtime. This had been under TNS iOS for some time under a V8 beta tag. This has actually become the official runtime for NativeScript 7. I know some people out there have tried it, and if you haven't, you're welcome to try it, although keep in mind that until 7.0 is released on Monday, with the 7.0 CLI, you can't use runtime dev dependencies just yet until we release this. So You can, though, however, use TNS iOS as you're used to. So in any current project, again, just to remind anyone out there, if they have, I believe it's iOS and version TNS iOS, I think it is. Now I'm actually forgetting the original structure. Let me double check. Yeah, like this. So in your current project, if you wanted to try the V8 runtime, you could set this to either this string, which actually is the literal V8 runtime, or the NPM version, which is, just to get the exact tag here. It's beta V8. So this beta V8 tag matches the actual literal version here, but you can use this. So for any current projects out there, if you want to just try V8 with your project, as we've mentioned in the past, we've kind of been working with V8 now really all summer. It's been in beta officially now since maybe the end of June it was, and we're using this in production apps already ourselves, but definitely feel free to give it a shot. But this is actually what is now the 7.0 official iOS runtime. So that is a look at what NativeScript 7 will look like from a project standpoint. We are finishing up some changes to the CLI for the migrate. So when you run migrate, we're going to see if we can just auto flatten your package for you and create the NativeScript config file for you as well. It's worth noting you can also use JS. So any vanilla JS projects, this doesn't have to be TS. This can be a JS file. And you can export some module there too. So the new project templates will be updated to generate these for you depending on the project type. So yeah, you can use JS or TS there. And then of course, no NSconfig. So we got rid of that. And everything is driven by this config file now. So let's take a look at one other big thing that's happened just this week, and that is contributing to NativeScript source in general. We finally merged this mono repo we've been working on through the summer, which contained the ES 2017 changes, which NativeScript 7 is now targeting by default. So all of the new TS configs with NativeScript 7 will be using ES 2017 or ES 2015 and higher. I mean, basically the minimum would be ES 2015 or higher, and the module you can use ES Next. And for anyone who manually updates, and we're gonna have some blog posts on this when we do the release on Monday, but just to state on this call for anyone who's kind of thinking through it to themselves, and you try to do some manual updates, the one thing that people forget to do is the module resolution. So in a lot of projects out there, the module resolution is not in the TS config. So when you bump up to ES 2015 and higher, you want to make sure you have the module resolution set to node. That's a big thing for sure, that if you do update the targeting, that you want to make sure is set. So let's take a look at the contributing structure in core now, which is the big thing that's happened in terms of source management. So we have been trying to simplify all the management of the source into a structure that will allow us to push fixes and features in a much more regular cadence, as well as with a bit more speed and swiftness. One thing that's always been a bit of a bear is when TypeScript updates anything and we want to bump to those versions. That can always be quite a bit of a bear, depending on all things that need to be affected, because generally you do want to update things in sequence or in parallel, I should say, when you do TypeScript bumps. So we have brought some source together in this mono repo, and we also have the internal at NativeScript plugins going to follow the same structure and ease of maintenance. And what it boils down to is npm run setup to set up a workspace, and then npm start, which gives an interactive display. And let's actually take a look at a video that Alex did on contributing to look at this all together. There's going to be several of these contributing videos that we'll do and how-tos that'll be posted on the source repo. But before I play that, Let me actually go to the source repo itself. And we can see that this has this new structure with all the history intact, of course, but we did reorganize the structure to follow a more, you could consider it a standard open source project structure. There are quite a few out there that follow this similar structure, but we have some tooling built into this to make it really nice to work with. But let's let Alex explain it best, and we can all watch this together. Now, the only thing I'm unsure about is the audio. We'll pick up here. Let me play this for a minute, and you all let me know if you can actually hear the audio from this. Make sure the volume is turned up enough to hear it.
While using NativeScript, have you ever thought, I wish it had this feature?
Can everyone hear that audio?
Or I wish
yes, we can hear it.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it does look like it's coming through. If it's too, is it too loud?
No, it was just fine.
Okay, let's watch this here together.
While using NativeScript, have you ever thought, I wish it had this feature, or I wish it did this thing? Well, it's an open source framework, so maybe you've thought about how you would contribute to NativeScript, but then you wondered, does it take a rocket science degree in order to be able to do that? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to fork the repository, get it on your computer, and play around with the source code. I'll even show you how to modify a bit of source code and see the changes live sync to a device. That's coming right up. All right, welcome back. My name is Alex Ziskind, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to contribute to NativeScript. This is the first part of a series of videos where we're going to dive into details on how to contribute to different aspects and the different applications that you have in the repository. But in this video, I'm going to show you how to get started, and I'll show you where to change code. Let's dive right in. Okay, so here is github.com/NativeScript. It's an open source project. The repository that we're going to look at is the main NativeScript repository. Make sure you're logged in, you have an account. You're going to click on fork. That's just the way GitHub works. Before you clone a repo, you need to fork it. So I'm going to click on my account here, and this is going to make a copy of this NativeScript repository in my own account. So now you can see that the URL is actually github.com/alexziskin1/NativeScript. This is where your own name would be up here. All right, now the next step would be to clone. So I'm going to click on this code button here, and I'm going to clone the repository. I'm going to pop open a terminal and make sure you have Git installed. I'm going to type in git clone and then paste in that URL. That took about 1.5 seconds to clone. I'm going to go to the NativeScript folder and open that up in my editor. I happen to be using Visual Studio Code. So this is the NativeScript repository. This is a mono repo. To get started with this, there's going to be one command you need to issue. So I'm going to pop open the terminal right here in VS Code by pressing Control backtick. You can also go back to the terminal and do the same thing. I'm going to just work right here in VS Code. Let's give it some more space so we have a lot more space to work with. And I'm going to type in npm run setup. This is going to run through and install the workspace dependencies. It's also going to execute some unit tests just to get everything ready for development. And when it's finished, the next step is you're going to run npm start. Now this is brand new. This will display an interactive menu. And this is what makes NativeScript development so much fun and easy now. Let me just give a little bit more space so we can see the menu here. And you'll be able to navigate using your arrow keys. These are the different options you can run inside the workspace that allow you to work on different things or test different parts of the framework. You can run automated tests for iOS, for Android. The test runner will execute integration tests on iOS and Android. Then you have Toolbox. So these three commands, Toolbox Clean, Toolbox iOS, and Toolbox Android. These are used for live syncing changes to core modules. And it's also good for debugging issues and just testing things out. Next, we have the UI test targets. So we have UI.clean, .iOS, and .android. I'm going to stop saying clean because it's obvious that we can just use that to clean each one of these instances. iOS and Android for the UI suite will display a ton of different UI components that you can test and that you can try against the iOS and Android runtimes. After that, we have our @NativeScript namespace. We have the build task, which will actually build NativeScript core for deployment to NPM. You can run a set of unit tests against core here. There's UI mobile base, which is the base level for UI core itself. You can also run a Webpack build, and you can run unit tests against Webpack. All right, so that's the NativeScript side. And then you have this focus section, which is really cool because now we're dealing with a mono repo. So when you open this up in Visual Studio Code, for example, like we have here, there's a lot to look at, but you might not need to look at everything while you're developing. For example, in the apps folder, you have automated, you have your toolbox, you have your UI, and then you have your actual core packages here, UI mobile base, and then Webpack. You might not need to see everything. I'm going to give you a concrete example here. Let's say you were looking for Builder. So I'm going to type Builder here, and this will show me all the files where Builder shows up. That might be a little too much to look at because, well, we're trying to find one specific builder on the package where we're trying to work. This packages folder contains all the core modules for NativeScript. I'm going to come back to a demo momentarily here and show you an example of live syncing any kind of changes that you make here while you're developing. We'll come back to that. Then we have types for iOS, we have types for Android, and we have something called UI mobile base. This is where the source code for the underlying native widgets lives. So here we have iOS widgets, and then we have the Android ones as well. You don't need to modify that very often, but you can if you want to. It lives right there in UI mobile base. Now the Webpack source is pretty interesting too. This includes all the templates that I used across all the apps, and all the Webpack transient dependencies are managed here as well. The apps folder has the automated tests. Those are the ones I mentioned right over here. And then we have the toolbox. That's these three right here, used for experimentation. And then you have your UI sample app target here, which is these three right here. Now let's get back to that builder example I was talking about. So when we search for builder up here, you get a lot of different options that you might not even care about. And that's what this focus is all about down here. So if I go down here and select Focus Core, for example, and press enter there, now the Visual Studio integration will actually filter out anything that's not related to core. If we take a look at packages here, you'll see that only core is available, whereas before you had a bunch of other packages here. Now only core is visible. So this will allow you to focus in, and when you actually do a file search for Builder in Visual Studio Code, you get a lot less options here. Visual Studio Code is actually trimming down the results here because, well, we don't want to see them right now. WebStorm and PHP Storm support is likely coming as well pretty soon. Now, when we selected that option, we actually get printed out what command was executed on the command line to get us that focus mode. I can use that command again. I'm going to copy that here and paste it, and I can actually filter it down even more. Let's say I wanted to narrow the scope of the search and what's displayed in the editor folders, and I wanted to narrow this down to a certain app scope. So I'm going to select apps here and type in toolbox. Now, if I take a look at packages, we only have core here, just like before, but we also have only one app showing, and that's the toolbox. We don't have the other apps showing like we did before. And when I do my search for Builder, you see that I don't even have a scroll bar here anymore. So my results from the search are even narrower, which is going to help me navigate my code a lot easier. Now you can always reset that. We can run npm start again, and we can reset our focus by typing in focus reset. So you don't need to always use the up and down arrows for navigation. You can actually just start typing what you want, the command that you want, and the command palette will be narrowed down as well. So we can select focus reset from this menu, and this will reset the focus. And now all our packages are back here. All our apps are back. By the way, you see that it's a little more difficult using VS Code for npm start tasks. So you could do that right here on the regular terminal. Let's say npm start, and this is going to be a lot easier. So I can type focus and then get to what I need right here. Now the fun part. Let's take a look at an example of what we can actually do. I'm actually going to go back to the terminal and show you how to run an app from here. So I'm going to run UI apps.ui.ios. Let's run that one. Now, right now, I don't have a real device plugged into my computer, but I do have the iOS simulator, so I'm going to bring that up right here. So this is a sample app that actually shows you all these UI widgets that you can play around with, and there are some pretty good examples here, like animation, bottom navigation, and then button, CSS. You can download it and play around with it. There's a lot to look at. But let's say I wanted to do a global change on one of these UI widgets. Let's take a look at button, for example. I'm going to go back to the code, and I'm going to leave this running because we have live syncing going on in the background. I'm going to open up packages, core. I can go search for a button, and yeah, that might be easy to find for me because I know exactly where it is. But I can also go up here, press F1 in VS Code, and search for button. Here are all the different button related files. And let's say that in iOS, I wanted to change the color of the button text. Well, how would I do that? Let's find the button area right here. Here is the button common, and this is the code that's shared between iOS and Android. Then we have specific code for Android. Let me just close this up to give us more space. You'll see Java related code here. It's actually TypeScript, but we're calling Java APIs. And we have iOS specific code here. If I do a search in the code for color, nothing is shown there. So if I take a look at button, I'm going to see that button actually inherits from button base. So I'm going to navigate to button base, and there's nothing color related here either. So I'm going to go up one more level in the hierarchy of my UI controls. I'm going to go to text base. Let's go to index.ios.ts, and I'm going to search for color here. And indeed, I do have some color here. And it looks like this is where I have my getter for my native color, and I have my setter for native color. And this is where I'm setting the color. So first I'm determining what the value here, if it's going to be a NativeScript color instance or a native iOS color instance, and then I'm passing that to set color. Instead of doing this, what I'm going to do is actually say this.setColor, and I'm going to use the iOS native APIs to get a constant of a color that I'm going to select here. So UI color dot, let's say red color, that's a constant. And I'm going to actually bring this up so I can do it side by side and show you what happens here. Here's my simulator. I'm going to save this file, and you'll see that in the background, we have a rebuild process happen and a live sync. And you can see that now all our buttons actually have red text. And not only that, because we've made this change in text space, all our text is going to have red text as well. Now, once you're done making your changes or fixing a bug or doing something else or adding a feature, all you have to do is just create a commit to your fork of the repository and then create a pull request from that to the main NativeScript repository, and you're done. So this is how easy it is to work with NativeScript code and to contribute to the NativeScript repositories. What's on your wish list for NativeScript? Let me know down in the comments below, and also subscribe to this channel for more NativeScript tips, tricks, and tutorials, including this series on contributing, which is going to continue, and I'm going to do a few more videos on that as well. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Okay, thanks for that, Alex. That was very helpful. Definitely part of the repo structure is really to make working with the source a bit easier. That's been a long gripe, I think, for anyone that's contributed on source before in the past, in the structure of that and just kind of working with that a bit easier. So the structure is really meant to make it much easier to work in, open it up a lot where you can make free-form changes on the fly, and even experiment. You know, if you're working on something on your project and there was something in core that wasn't behaving like you wanted it to, or maybe it needed to do something that you believe it needed to do, you'd have a way to kind of experiment with that a bit easier. We've also been contemplating adding an extra command in the CLI that would let you run the live source against your own projects. So you could even run a live instance of the live source against your own project with kind of one command, just giving it a path to your project. And that would let you really experiment on a pretty deep level with all sorts of things there. That same structure that he went over, we're using across other source repos as well. So as I mentioned, the plugins for @NativeScript that will be bumping major versions out on Monday as well. Those are going to be managed in on the same repo structure and kind of dealt with in the same interactive display. So trying to bring kind of everything around to the 2020 roadmap, which is one of the big items, was to simplify the source management, really open it up a bit and just make it nice and consistent to work with. And it will help us bump some major versions, so keep things in sync with latest evolutionary transient dependencies, you know, TypeScript being one of the biggest ones. but certainly other transient dependencies that if they were all separated, just is very laborsome to try to update and do sweeping updates for. So those are the updates for today. We had a look at the NativeScript 7 project, what the structure will look like with the new consolidated config file. This config file too is in the LiveSync scope, so you can make LiveSync changes to this config and actually have it pick up the file change and refresh the project with that in play. And no embedded package JSON anymore, and then a simplified, more standard package for your project, just managing runtimes and dev dependencies. And beyond that, I believe that's it. If anyone has a question, feel free to ping. One thing, actually, I do want to highlight, I remember a question last time was on different bundle IDs for iOS and Android. So you can see from the IntelliSense here that we do get ID embedded. So you can still do custom IDs, bundle IDs for iOS and Android if your IDs do differ. So that is still inside here. And these will always override the ID here. So you could set a general ID, but if you had a custom Android bundle ID, you can override it by specifying ID here. With that, I think we'll close the call for today. Appreciate everyone joining, and hopefully that was informative to what to expect for Monday. Again, we are finishing up some blog posts. We'll probably have 4 in total that will detail certain aspects, just to clarify as much as we can on any of the details here. But I think hopefully the strong takeaway is that it is a simplification of the project setup that I think will make it much easier to work with, as well as provide us the ability to add some more power over time in a streamlined way. Everyone take care out there, and we'll see you next week.